Good evening. I'm Dave Allen, the Communications Engagement and Marketing Manager here at the Council. I'd like to welcome you to our Local Plan Update online information session. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I won't read out the agenda. It's all there for you to have a read and see who's going to be presenting tonight. You'll notice that your cameras and microphones are off. That's to reduce the risk of technical issues this evening and to allow the presentations to run smoothly. But we did request and had submitted questions in advance, and you can also submit questions in the chat function as we go along, and at the end of the session there will be an opportunity for those to be answered. We may not get to all of them, so we will prioritise those that have the widest interest, we feel, to everyone on the call and the general public. Site specific questions, particularly for the smaller sites, are probably best submitted at our drop-in sessions at Shoot End, that there'll be details on later this evening, or directly to the team themselves. We will, at the end of the session, be sending out frequently asked questions as well to cover those off. So that's all from me. I'd like to hand over to Councillor Wayne Smith, who is the Executive Member for Planning and Enforcement. Thank you.
Evening, Dave, and thank you everyone, and welcome to this session. I do hope you find it informative. We've got lots of experts on the line this evening to take you through the consultation plans. One thing I would say right at the front, based on some of the feedback I've had so far, we are introducing a series of 8 sessions at Shoot End, where you can go along between 9:30 and 12 o'clock and meet planning officers and various officers in the council to talk about the consultations and any issues or any questions you want answering. So a few further things that I've been asked over the last few weeks since we started the consultation. It was only 2 years ago, or roughly 2 years ago, that we did a consultation previously for the local plan, and that was centred around Graiseley. So why are you doing it again? Well, as I'm sure a lot of you will know, the reasons why we had to move away from the Graiseley option was around the evacuation zone. The MOD, in conversation or within consultation with the Office of Nuclear Regulation, decided to move the evacuation zone, which no longer made Graiseley viable. So what we've been doing over the last 18 months plus, we've been looking for new sites. And in looking for those new sites, we've extensively looked at all of the brownfield sites that's been put forward to us, as well as looking at brownfield sites that haven't been put forward to us. I think there is this view across the borough that there are lots of brownfield sites in the borough that could be used. Well, I can assure you that we've extensively looked at all the sites that have been put forward, and as I said, sites that haven't been put forward. What we mustn't forget is a lot of those sites are very valuable employment land, and their owners will not be putting them forward if it's not viable to them, and that they're probably more viable as employment sites. So a couple of other things. Why have a plan? John will talk a bit more later on the actual numbers around what numbers we have to achieve between now and 2038, the number per year. But not having a plan, in our view, is more dangerous than having one. Not having one will cause us problems in terms of we won't be able to defend our plans as they are at the moment, and hopefully as they move forward. Equally, we completely lose control of the planning system. So in our view, having a plan is better for the borough than not having one. So that's about it from me. As I said, don't forget the 7 extra events that have been put on, which will take place, that Ian Church will talk a little bit later, talk about the actual dates a little bit later on. But with no further ado, I'll hand you over to John Holsall, the leader of the council, and give you some more information on the work that's been done around our numbers and the work that's been done with trying to persuade government to keep our numbers down. Over to you, John.
Good evening, and thank you for coming. I'm John Holsall, the leader of the council, and taking over from Wayne. We've been around this block a number of times in the last 3 years since I was elected leader. And the first thing we did was to get a lot of support from the residents on the housing numbers. Pretty much everybody agreed that we are, as a borough, are suffering from too much development. We got the very best advice from the leading planning barristers in the country. In fact, we've engaged them to contest our appeals, and we've been very successful since we engaged them. But the avenues we've gone down have been fruitless. Essentially, we have to work within the government guidelines and planning policies with a standard method for calculating housing numbers, which is 768 for the moment, which compares very much with what we've been doing over the past few years. And in fact, the core strategy was, I believe, 650. So it's not materially larger, but I think all of us would agree that we would actually like it smaller. That's not to say no houses, because people want houses, but it's to say that we'd prefer it to be about 500 or so. But nevertheless, we're lumped with that 768. What happens if we don't have a plan for 768? Well, a number of councils have decided that they won't play, and what's happened is that the plan, or just taken over their planning department. The case in point is South Oxfordshire Liberal Controlled Council, who decided that they would not observe the planning rules, and certainly in my neck of the woods, a lot of the green spaces which would have been protected by the plan have gone. We did have a successful campaign last year where the government was looking to increase the housing numbers materially for us to 1635 from our current level, and we managed to defeat that, which is very much a credit to the government listening to its Conservative councillors. So no one wants any development, but we are stuck with a number of homes to deliver. The criteria which protects it is a thing called the 5-year land supply, which has been quite strong over recent years, but is now getting weaker. So we will very soon get a position, if we don't have a fully approved plan, where we will not be able to defend our building policies. So what happens then? Well, effectively, every square inch of the borough has an option on it. There's developers circling around. Why? Because it's a very desirable place to live. It's a very popular place to live. It's a very safe place to live. We're the most prosperous borough and most healthy borough in the country. So if you live here, you can work in Reading, Basingstoke, Slough, Staines, Heathrow, Slough. So the opportunities for employment are huge. It's an area of high growth anyway, so it's very attractive, and it's very attractive to people in West London who want to move out to the home counties. So what would happen if we didn't have a plan? All those people who have options on land in the borough will exercise those options, go to appeal, and we would lose the appeals. So rather than having 768 houses a year, we'd probably be in excess of 2,000, and 2,000, and they would be unplanned, and we would get a very low level of infrastructure payments from developments. So whilst I regret every blade of grass which goes with development, and really every blade of grass, this is the least worst option. So thank you for listening, and I'll hand over to Ian.
Okay, thank you, John. Allow me just to share the presentation again. Bear with me 1 second. Right, I hope that's coming through. Right, my name's Ian Bellinger. I'm the Service Manager for Growth and Delivery, and I've been asked to give an overview of the revised growth strategy consultation. But before I get there, as we've just touched on, we prepared a full draft plan in 2020, as Councillor Smith said, but that plan is unachievable. So therefore, we have to decide on an alternative strategy, and the option of not agreeing an alternative strategy would have all the negatives we've just heard about in terms of loss of our ability to manage development and wrap infrastructure delivery around that. The revised growth strategy consultation is our idea as to what the best alternative approach is, based on our understanding at this time, and it's on that we're inviting views to be submitted. So if you agree with us, please say so. If you do disagree with us, please say so. It is a consultation. But just a quick introduction to the document itself. As local plans are long, complicated documents, and because the majority of things that we consulted on back in 2020 are not impacted by the changes we need to make, we've taken the decision to focus the consultation on effectively housing land supply, which is the most impacted area. The other aspect or significant aspect we're consulting on is inviting views on areas we consider suitable for local green space, which is an opportunity to identify and protect local areas of green space which are of particular importance, and is an area we've done considerable work on since 2020. And then there's also a single question on Pinewood, which I'll cover later, but this isn't a site that's proposed for development. It's a different matter. But just to clarify, in terms of the areas we're not consulting on, we do intend to continue the broad approach set out in the draft plan from 2020, updating them as necessary to reflect change of evidence and change in national guidance and policy, etc. But that includes our commitments to net carbon development or net zero carbon development, biodiversity net gain, affordable housing, etc. Before getting into what the new strategy is, it's worth just touching on the background to new housing. It's also worth noting, in addition to what Councillor House has said in terms of local plans requiring to meet a housing number defined by the government, to also note that that any strategy we do pick must be demonstrably deliverable. So the options available to us are those where we know land will become available at a point in time. So it's not a free choice as to what the council can do. It has to be something that we have sufficient confidence that can be delivered when we expect. And an inspector, when they look at our local plan to check it works, will be very interested to understand that it is achievable. But going back one, the government planning policy does require us to build housing. The minimum number, as John Housel referred to, is 768 currently, and that's established by a standard method set out in national guidance. We did engage a leading barrister. We've also engaged a leading demographic and statistical expert to understand whether there are robust grounds to make an argument that the authorities should be able to build less. And their advice to us is there are no apparent exceptional circumstances under the current government framework to enable us to do that. And that means this authority is faced with some very difficult challenges. The government planning policies are very clearly set up to deliver development. So if you don't make the choice yourself, they're set up in a way that the housing will come. So in essence, our choice is where housing should be directed to, not if. And again, before getting on to our strategy, we should also say that we did ask matters of principle in some of our earlier consultations, in terms of how residents and other stakeholders felt that development could best be met within the borough. And that told us that the single most preferred approach was to utilise large-scale developments where infrastructure could be provided alongside to meet the majority of housing needs. There was a recognition there would be a wider need for different types of sites to supplement that, but that was the principal approach that was supported. There was also a very strong wish to see the best use of previously developed land where that was in a suitable location, and they also indicated there was a wish to protect the identity of places and the role of the countryside and the green belt. Now, I should observe here that there are parallels between the expressed preferences that have been put to us through those consultations and technical solutions from the planning system. In essence, large-scale developments are often the best way of addressing some of our more significant challenges, such as climate change and such as the learnings from COVID. In essence, they offer the opportunity to design in sustainability from the outset. For example, including measures to lessen the need to travel by car for unnecessary journeys, so reducing carbon footprint and impact on the environment and air quality compared to, say, more dispersed types of development. And they also offer the opportunity to plan accessible green spaces alongside communities, planning drainage management from the beginning, as well as biodiversity improvements and renewable energy generation as well. So turning to the proposed approach, our view remains, as we previously consulted on, that the focus of our strategy should be large strategic developments with infrastructure provided alongside. That's in line with the expressed wishes and indeed in line with the approach the council currently takes to development. In addition, we wish to take advantage of previously developed land, particularly land that's available in the town centres, where there's an opportunity for even more trips to be undertaken by walking and cycling, and potentially some flexibility on height, depending on local sensitivities. I should comment here that I'm often asked why we can't simply build all our housing on previously developed land. And the simple answer is that there is simply insufficient amounts of that to enable us to do that. We deliver about 100 homes a year from smaller sites across the borough, of which a proportion is previously developed, and comparing that to a housing requirement from the government of 700 to 800 homes a year, you can see there's a significant gap. It's also very true, as Councillor Smith referred to, that many of our employment areas remain extremely attractive by their landowners for employment, and we also have to plan for jobs retention and jobs growth as well. So that land is equally important. However, we have gone through exercises looking at vacant land and trying to understand if there were any opportunities, and it's simply there are not at scale opportunities available to help meet that housing need. So returning to large strategic developments and use of previously developed land, together those are not sufficient to meet the housing requirements of government. So the strategy also includes some additional smaller sites spread across the borough, which I will come on to. So in terms of our current plan allocates 4 major developments in the locations listed on the screens, and we expect those developments to complete as part of our updated strategy. And some of them are at different stages of completion, but the completions from 2018 are all part of our strategy. We have, however, taken the opportunity to review those major developments, and where there are suitable new opportunities within them or adjacent to them, which we feel respects the original vision for the community and can be supported by the infrastructure, we've proposed amendments to those existing major developments. The largest change is by far an area within South Wokingham major development where land for an additional 835 homes is identified. In terms of new opportunities for a large-scale development and the creation of a sustainable new community, there are effectively 3 options which are of sufficient scale to allow us to do that. Those areas which are promoted to us are the Hall Farm Loddon Valley area, which is between Shinfield, Sindlesham and Arborfield, the Ashridge area, which is between the M4 and A329M north of Wokingham, and land to the east of Twyford within Ruscombe Parish. Now, each of those has the ability to deliver at least 3,000 dwellings over its full capacity, and at least one of those is required if we are to meet the government's housing expectations. But it must be said that having assessed all of those sites, there is no such thing to say any of them is perfect. Each has different impacts and each has different opportunities. So, for example, the Hall Farm option, which is the largest opportunity, is in proximity to where we expect jobs growth to occur in the Thames Valley Science Park, providing an ability to put homes alongside jobs and limit travel. However, there are issues such as needing to bridge the M4 to allow travel. The Ashridge area is situated between the two major roads, which are a significant barrier to movement both north and south, and to the west. Access onto the A329M is only possible to the east due to proximity to junctions, and that means access is compromised in terms of onto that dual carriageway. Access would also require land which is currently through an area which is protected as sustainable natural green space, and so may not be available, which is another deliverability concern. In terms of the Twyford Ruscombe area, the area certainly has reasonable accessibility to the train station and the mainline train, but there is limited local employment in that locality, and there are also air quality issues in terms of the village centre in Twyford, which people would look to reach. And a large area of the land is best and most versatile agricultural land, so the best quality agricultural land. And in addition to that, the whole area is within the green belt, where the government requires us to look at other options and dismiss them before choosing an option to release land in the green belt. Our view at the moment, and is the one we're consulting on, is that the Hall Farm Loddon Valley opportunity is our preferred choice. In our judgment, that is the more sustainable and more deliverable option of the three, and it has the ability to provide ultimately around 4,500 dwellings, of which around half might be delivered within the period up to 2038, so it has that longer housing supply. As mentioned, it's in proximity to the employment growth, potentially has the ability to accommodate the Royal Berkshire Hospital should they choose to do so, and if that is granted by the Treasury and central government. And there are significant opportunities to put infrastructure alongside, and that viability of doing that has been tested. But we're conscious in terms of our policy that we need to protect the separation of settlements as well and ensure the development is quality overall. I won't go into too much detail because my colleagues will be coming back to that shortly. The consultation simply asks you if you prefer to that, or whether you agree with us, or to what extent you agree with us, and I would encourage you to respond to that. And if you feel that we have made our judgment wrongly, then please tell us what you would do instead and the reasons why you would choose that option instead. Just now turning to the smaller sites, whilst the identification of a large strategic site helps meet a significant amount of our future housing need, it's not possible to do everything that way. Large sites take a while to get going to deliver large amounts of development, in that they're reliant on significant infrastructure interventions to enable that to happen. And so you often find the development starts with a lower delivery rate, then picks up to a higher level and then drops down after a good number of years. The government, however, wished to see more consistent housing land supply. And so we have identified a range of smaller sites across settlements, across the borough, to help meet our overall housing number, but also to enable that more consistent delivery over time. We have tried to make those sites reasonably proportional to the type of settlement they relate to, with proportionally more homes being focused on major and modest settlements, which has more services and facilities locally, and proportionally less in settlements which have limited services and facilities locally. And as I've said, we've taken the opportunity to try and spread those across the borough as best we can. Now, I should say that the addresses we've used in the consultation document relate to the settlement the site best relates to. It's not to do with the parish council area they are in. So it is possible for a site to be on the edge of, say, Finchampstead North, but would be within Barkham Parish. So please, when looking at the document, bear that in mind. It's set up more as a postal address. If in doubt, of course, there are maps in the back of the document that tells you where every site is in detail. So please have a look at those. Turning to the second major area of the consultation, we've taken the opportunity to consult on local green space. Now, local green space is an opportunity for local communities to identify areas of green space of particular importance to them and to set up a policy framework which enables their protection against inappropriate forms of development. Now, designation isn't suitable in all cases, and it doesn't mean that things that aren't designated are not also important. This is a particular opportunity set out in national policy. The government guidance requires that any designation must be consistent with the planning for sustainable communities, and that includes the complementary investment in sufficient homes, jobs and other services. And there are three broad rules the government have set out. The first is that the land must be in reasonable proximity to the community it serves. The second is that it must be demonstrably special to that community and hold a particular significance. And the examples they've given are beauty, historic environment, heritage, recreational value, including playing fields, tranquility and richness of wildlife. And the third criteria is it must be local in character and not an extensive tract of land. So it can't be countryside for countryside protection reasons, etc. We've tried to apply our interpretation of that guidance as a way of looking at the proportionality of the scale of the site to the local community it serves. Now, the draft local plan in 2020 had very few areas promoted to us as local green space, and we allocated or proposed the allocation of 8 of those areas, which was the vast majority. However, we felt following the consultation that many communities may have not understood the opportunity, and so we called for further suggestions to parish and town councils and local amenity groups, and we had over 100 areas promoted to us. We've now reviewed those, and we believe an additional 70 merit allocation as local green space. Now, our assessments for all those areas of land are published alongside our consultation in a local green space topic paper, and I would encourage you to look at that. Now, I find it very difficult in planning consultations to get people to support policies rather than necessarily object to a proposal. I would stress the importance of writing in to support a local green space, in that it's meant to be demonstrably special to the local community. So evidence from the community that land is special to them helps us demonstrate that our assessment is correct to an inspector. So if you review our land and or our assessment and you agree that the land is demonstrably special to you, I would encourage you to respond and let us know that, so we have that extra information. Just touching on the last matter from me of Pinewood. Now, this is separate to the allocation of land for development, and it's identified for self-funded regeneration. Now, Pinewood accommodates a number of valued community facilities, but the premises are in need of investment, being of varied quality. I should stress there's no proposal for development of Pinewood for alternative uses. The intent of the policy was to identify an area as important for the community and put in place a positive framework for investment in those community facilities on site. What the policy mentions, however, is enabling development, and that is something that could be used in the absence of other forms of investment to improve those facilities. And enabling development simply in the policy framework would commit the council to providing any income received from that development into those community facilities on site or potentially off site. But I should stress that any proposal that was to happen on the site would need to be agreed with the community facilities on site. And again, investment in those facilities doesn't have to come from development, it could come from other sources as well. So all I'd say on that is if you simply disagree that identifying it in that way is unnecessary or would object to it for other reasons, please simply respond to the question in the consultation and say so. But with that, I will hand over to my colleague Mark Cupit, who will take you through some of the master planning and the Hall Farm Loddon Valley proposal in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Ian. Good evening, everybody. As Ian said, I'm Mark Cupit. I'm Assistant Director Delivery and Infrastructure, and I head up Strategic Growth, is Delivery and Associated Infrastructure. So hence this bit of the presentation. So you've heard about the demise really of Graiseley, and the process we went through with Loddon Valley Garden Village is really the same as with Graiseley. We set up an expert team, the one that we'd used in the past, led by your officer corps, and with support from members. David Locke Associates were procured along with Stantec, but locally probably better known as they used to be called, Peter Bratt, who've helped us through the process that was talked about earlier, in terms of understanding the site more in more detail in terms of baseline evidence, understanding the constraints and opportunities of a large area like this. And we undertook a number of technical workshops with the key stakeholders and the community to help design the concept behind what has become, we believe, quite an interesting and quite special proposal, because it has three key components. It has the residential side, it has the employment provision, quite a special employment provision by any measure, and also a pretty substantial country park running through the centre of it. I suppose of all the options that were promoted through the local plan, the Loddon Valley Garden Village is the most interesting because of that. It's a new, highly accessible, self-contained garden village with employment and a country park, as well as the housing. It's a village which could be a new place with its own identity, with enough critical mass, and Ian mentioned this earlier, to provide all its own infrastructure, and not just in terms of money, but also space. And that is important when you consider the critical mass that you would need for high-level infrastructure like a secondary school. When you're looking for a 20-hectare site, as we did at Arborfield, that's no mean feat, and 35 to 40 million pounds is no small sum to invest there. The primary schools, 2 to 2.5 hectares, 7 to 9 million pounds. So a development of this scale could generate an estimated community infrastructure levy land value capture from the developers of about 143 million pounds. Again, that does give a critical mass that means that a major development of this type is something that is quite desirable for an authority like Wokingham, which is so poorly funded nationally. The whole site is around 460 hectares. It has, as I've said, strategic employment at the innovation valleys. The university has some great plans for that, including a potential that the Royal Berkshire Hospital is running for a bid to either relocate or put some of the hospital within the former Science Park location. And there's a Treasury bid which is not yet decided, which is optioning build in site at Reading or off site somewhere else, or a bit of a mix between the two. The outcome of that isn't known yet. The new garden village itself would be designed to be infrastructure rich and high quality in terms of placemaking. All of the sports and leisure you'd expect with a development to this size, but also as this significant country park of 111 hectares. That is a super park by any standards. So basically, the work that we've done with Davy Lock has helped us to understand and identify infrastructure requirements and set some of them out for you in this consultation. Can we move to the next slide, please? Just in response to some of the dialogue in the previous meetings, and in addition to the presentation last week, we've slotted in this additional plan, which shows the key constraints, which is an additional level of detail that is available in the consultation documents. But if you look at the plan on the right of the screen, it shows the River Loddon corridor, and the blue areas are the areas susceptible to flood, largely the Loddon Valley. Anyone who's local or works in this area knows that the Loddon floods, but you can see there it runs clean through the centre of the site, and there's a small brook leading in from Barkham down to the right-hand corner of the plan. The baseline evidence for the creation of the master plan included this information, a high quality baseline information, engagement with the Environment Agency so that none of the development in the areas subject to flood, and as you can see they're set out to substantial park space, which would be a great asset to the site. Moving on to the next slide. So the design concept that has come out through consultation and through professional input is all about really creating a place with its own character, a bit like Arborfield strategic site, but bigger. Arborfield is 3,500 dwellings, only 900 have been built there today, but we're looking at 4,500 as the outcome for the site at Loddon Valley, if that is the chosen solution. There are three sort of reddish blobs in the residential side of the development, and they are local centres. The middle one is a bigger one, and that I would call a district centre. All of them are based on a 10-minute walkable district, so quite local community districts. And each one of them would have its own primary school, community centre and retail offer. The district centre, however, would have the secondary school as well. It would be the largest of the three, and the three would break up roughly into 1,000 each, possibly 1,500 in the centre. Overall, there would be 60 hectares of employment land on the western side of the valley, a great asset for the districts. And we've also already seen some investment gone in there from the university into Shinfield Studios and the British Museum Archive. And there are other great ideas like the potential to host the Royal Berkshire Hospital if the government fund that. So we can see there's quite an infrastructure rich package if that is the chosen one. Moving on, we've got another slide which talks a little bit more to the opportunities for green infrastructure and in a way to manage the blue infrastructure in quite an exciting way, which Fran Hobson, who's our lead on green and blue infrastructure, will talk in a bit more detail, so I'll try not to steal too much of her thunder. But this plan really shows that the south west to northeast corridor of the Loddon Valley is really showcased as a fantastic new riverside park, enabling the Loddon Valley long distance footpath as a spine through the site. It gives great opportunities for leisure, biodiversity opportunities for dealing with climate change, and at about 100 hectares it is a pretty substantial benefit. There are also northwest to southeast connective corridors, you can see there are 4 green lines running through the site, which provide pedestrian and in one case a motorised vehicle connection, a car route across the corridor. The northern of those 4 diagonal green lines runs through Carter's Hill, and that there are some lovely heritage buildings out there that have their own distinctive character within the Barkham Brook corridor as it leads into the Loddon Valley. And we are doing a little bit more work following discussion on site with a number of the residents there to try and showcase Carter's Hill as a more of a heritage enclave with less interference from the development. Obviously it will be impacted, but the final product would be a very high quality finish to that area. And I think with that I'll hand over to Chris Easton, who will talk to us about movement.
Good evening. As Mark mentioned, I'm Chris Easton and I'm Service Manager for New Highways at Wokingham. So picking up just from where Mark's left off there, this slide shows you the transport opportunities, or kind of sets out the kind of some of the skeleton of the infrastructure for the site in front of us. It's kind of bound by the M4 to the north, the Eastern Relief Road to the west, the A327 to the south, and then the Mole Road to the east. And basically within it there's a series of infrastructure packages. Moving on to sustainability first, there's the 3 yellow kind of dots that are shown there, which are in each of the district areas that Mark has mentioned, or the neighbourhood area walkable distances. They are community transport hubs, and obviously they will enable the site to be served by good access to public transport facilities, building on either new services or delivering new services, or building on some of the existing services that the south of the M4 is currently having developed, and also with the Arborfield SDL that's also been developed. Those services also reach out to will reach out to Muirhead Parker Ryde and the Green Park Station, as well as potentially to the future to the Winnersh railway station. So that gives the opportunity to both, public transport, sustainable activity and connections to railway stations to both the east and the west of the site. And within the series of the site, there is a whole raft of walking, cycling infrastructure that will be compliant with government guidance and kind of follow on from some of the infrastructure that we've already delivered in the borough along some of the greenways and our walking, cycling routes within the rest of the SDLs. There is a strategic route reserved through the middle of this site, which obviously will act as a key route already, but obviously has the benefit and the options to be upgraded in the future. And that kind of picks up on some of the points that Mark mentioned about whether the development of the hospital comes forwards, the scale size of the employment area, or in fact the whole development once built out, and that can also lead to the possibility and the improvement of not just only a connection over the M4 but also a connection to the M4. And conversations along those lines are currently being had very early, high level stage with National Highways, formerly Highways England, to understand obviously the implications for that and the benefits that could bring. That route itself connects in at the southern end there, and the southern end is the connection point. The main access point there would be just to the north of the Arborfield Cross Relief Road that's recently been it's open nearly a year now, which has delivered quite a bit of improvement through the village of Arborfield. So just going aside from the sustainability aspect and looking at how the council has kind of worked towards looking at this site as part of the master planning. So the council has a strategic transport model. Models aren't particularly that new, although 10 years is probably the length of the time that we've kind of been using them at Wokingham. And they are a great tool in terms of assessing and potentially looking at the forecast for new development. Now, a model is only as good as the base data that goes into it, and therefore our base data for the model is observed with live traffic patterns, and it's been developed and validated on the back of Department for Transport WebTag modelling guidance that is set out by them and needs to obviously meet those tests, and ours has been met to quite a good standard, and as has been used on a number of occasions to obviously bid for grant funding through central government for some of the infrastructure packages, therefore showing the calibre of the model that we have. That's not to say that the model won't give you the full answers always. It gives you a very good understanding of how the network operates and what potentially is needed to deliver a scheme of this size on a strategic nature. And the benefit of that is it gives you a very good base to work forward to. So you're not only establishing the next few years, but we can obviously forecast to the back end of the local plan, which is industry used now as a kind of a standard tool across all kind of industries, including local authorities. We validate the model as we go, because obviously as each application comes in, we don't take the answer straight out of the model and give that to, that's how the development's going to be. There will be further refinement and investigations of the local transport network as we progress, and the developments are required to do more junction surveys, more automatic traffic counts, so we can understand patterns in the network, and then review and refine the models as we go along to have a better understanding at the planning application stage. And that also helps us to make sure the model is kind of kept fresh and up to date by being able to assess and grow on that data. So I think that's probably a quick bit for that slide. So if we move to the next slide, this basically just picks up on and shows you a bit more. This information is available and in the documents that have been provided. And it just kind of highlights some of the infrastructure that's being delivered on site and around the development site, with the blue route running through the mill being identified as a key sustainable transport corridor, which will predominantly be for walking, cycling and public transport, and potentially earmarked for future sustainable connectivity also. And then just showing you one of the highlighted points, you've got point 8 at the bottom southern edge, and that is marking the roundabout, which is connection to the Ardpur Cross Relief Road. So I think that there's not really much more to add to that one. So if we jump to the next slide, that's the final slide, and this basically just helps to kind of show perhaps the kind of the wider borough, and you've got Hall Farm, which is the large hatch pink area in the middle, and you can see its location to the Eastern Relief Road to obviously the west, the Ardpur Cross Relief Road to the south, leading obviously down to Arborfield and the new Narmride extension, which is due to open during the middle of next year. And I think it just helps to, this slide, I quite like this one, as it kind of helps show that through our current local plan, there's a whole series of infrastructure packages, many of which are shown on this plan, obviously some that are just out of our borough as well, but we've been working towards with them to deliver the infrastructure for our current local plan, and that is either underway or completed. Just a good indication of the kind of the infrastructure that we look at to deliver, and it's meaningful when you're delivering such a development of this scale. So I think I hope that kind of helps, and I think we're moving. There'll be some question and answers shortly if you have any. So I'll hand over to Ian. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening. I'm Ian Church. I'm a team manager in the growth and delivery team. So just to give you a quick update in terms of the consultation documents that are available, and also how to respond. So the revised growth strategy is the key document we're consulting on, but there are a series of other technical documents which are also available. So one of the key documents is the sustainability appraisal. So that looks at a series of different criteria to look at sites holistically. So for example, it looks at the 3 largest sites that Ian mentioned earlier on to see how they perform in a series of different growth scenarios. And that helps us build our picture of the overall strategy. There is a non-technical summary which is available online, which helps to explain the purpose of that document, how it fits together. The master planning and transport assessment work have already been talked about this evening, but one document to draw your attention to specifically is the housing and economic land availability assessment, which is quite a long-winded way of effectively saying showing how we assess all of our sites. So all of those 300 plus areas of land that have been promoted to us through the course of the local plan are all assessed in terms of their constraints and in terms of their opportunities. So for things like flood risk, vehicular access, heritage considerations, and they're all set out in a series of appendices. So if you're interested in a particular site, that's the place to go and have a look at. The local green space assessment, that builds on the work Ian mentioned earlier on. So there's a performer there for each of the nominated areas of local green space, which sets it out on the basis of that national policy. And then there are also a series of other background topic and position papers on other issues like economic development and viability. In terms of responding to the consultation, so the key aspect is that it started a couple of weeks ago, and since then we've had 2 face-to-face events up in Wokingham and in Hartlefield. We've also had lots of other consultation work. So this is the 4th of our virtual events, but we've also had public notices, social media releases, and also postcards which have been sent to households across the borough. So the image on the right there, hopefully you'll be familiar with. But a key aspect is that the consultation ends on the 24th of January at 5 p.m. So please do respond by that point. And all this information is available on our website, and the recording of one of these virtual events will also be available later on this week. And in terms of responding specifically, we have our online Engage platform, which is a new platform which you might not be as familiar with, but that's where if you want to respond to our online survey, which is probably the easiest way of responding, you can click on our Engage platform there, and that will take you straight to the situation where you can respond to the survey. You can also email us directly at the address there, and there's a response form online you can download and fill in, or you can of course simply send a letter to us at the address listed. If you do have any further questions, you can of course email us on the same address, but we're also hosting a series of drop-in sessions at our shoot end offices. So all of the documents which are available at our public events, the ones I mentioned earlier in Wokingham and Hartlefield, will be available. So hard documents that you can have a look through, and officers will be available there starting tomorrow from 9:30 to 12 noon, and that's for the next few weeks running up to Christmas, but also then after Christmas. So if you do have any specific questions, as Councillor Smith mentioned earlier on about particular sites, then do come along and we'll be happy to have a conversation with you. So that's the final part for me. As ever, I just encourage everyone to respond, and I'll hand back to Dave for the final part of the session.
Thank you, Ian, and to our other presenters. If Ian, if you could keep your camera on and hopefully be joined by Mark and Ian Bellinger, because we've had some questions. Not so many in the chat this evening, but we had some submitted in advance. A number related to Pinewood, but I think Ian covered those issues off earlier. So we'll move on to affordable housing. We've had some questions about that. In particular, how will we ensure that developers actually deliver the 35% affordable housing that we require in policy?
Do you want me to do that? Or...
Oh, thank you, Mark.
Yeah, okay. So we have a lot of evidence based on what's happened to date with the current core strategy. So since 2010, we've secured policy compliant affordable housing on every single site. There have been no challenges. The evidence we've got in terms of viability shows that the affordable housing can be delivered in addition to all the other infrastructure. So I think it is highly unlikely that that's a challengeable element of the policy requirement for any of our sites going forward, unless there's a substantial change in national guidance.
Thank you, Mark. We also had a number of questions about the local green space, particularly people asking if they can nominate additional spaces onto that. Is that something you cover, Ian?
Yep, I can happily pick that one up. In essence, yes, if someone wishes to nominate an additional space to those that are being put forward at the moment, then they're free to do so as part of this consultation. What I would encourage them to do is look at the local green space assessment, the local green space topic paper that's been produced, and look at how we've assessed those sites and the government guidelines, and to possibly produce a sort of a shadow assessment, so their view on the questions that the government guidance require us to ask, and then submit that as part of their representation to us. And of course, if anyone is struggling to find that document on the website or wishes to talk through any aspects of the government guidance, then drop into one of those sessions or drop us an email and we can call you back and explain how best to do that. But in summary, yes, new areas can be promoted, but you must explain why that area is of particular importance to your community, because that's the aspect that we will need to test.
Okay, thank you, Ian. We've also had quite a number of comments and questions submitted about flooding and floodplain, and I believe we've got Fran, who's our flooding expert, on the call, particularly in relation to Hall Farm. I wonder if you could talk through that issue for us, Fran.
Yeah, no problem. Hi everyone, good evening. My name's Francesca Hobson and I am one of the service managers at Wokingham Borough Council, and my service includes the flooding and drainage team. So the simple answer in relation to a question around building in the floodplain is no. Development will not be built in high fluvial or river flood risk areas. Infrastructure will avoid these locations. In the case of Hall Farm in particular, which has the River Loddon running through the middle of it, as Mark Cupit highlighted in his presentation, much of the floodplain is on the western side of the Loddon and away from where the residential parcels are proposed. So the western side is being proposed as an eco-valley, including a significant country park. And this will be separating the residential areas from the business and the industrial locations. And within the Eco Valley, there will be opportunities to deliver natural flood risk management techniques to reduce flood risk further downstream, as well as biodiversity enhancements and water quality enhancements as well, and also opportunities for tree planting too. From a surface water flood risk perspective, which is separate to fluvial or river flooding, often there's a perception that development will increase surface water runoff, but this isn't the case. So nowadays, a developer is required to incorporate sustainable drainage systems such as ponds, swales, wetlands, attenuation tanks, and also permeable paving into their drainage designs for new developments. And these are designed to actually mimic greenfield runoff rates that would have existed prior to development. So ultimately, the surface water reaches the river at exactly the same rate as it would have done prior to development. The other point to note is that with regards to climate change and the possible increase in frequency and intensity of rainfall, new developments will cater for this through a national requirement for new development drainage designs to consider a percentage climate change allowance as well. So in a nutshell, the designs will cater for the possible increase in the frequency and the intensity of storms that we may experience in the future.
Thank you, Fran. Thanks for that very detailed answer. I've had a couple submitted into the chat, so I'll ask a couple of those now. Do the 100 houses per year include prior approval conversions from offices? I think probably Ian, if that's one for you, I would imagine.
Yes, that might be referring to the small sites. The less than 100 homes come forward from small sites, which by that I mean schemes of 9 dwellings or less. So it can include different types of application types. So if anyone's listening is not familiar, there are different ways of applying to planning permission. You can get full planning permission, prior approval, which is more of an automated approach under national guidance and an outline. So most of our smaller sites of 9 dwellings or under are normal full planning permissions, but I wouldn't be brave enough to say there was no prior approval counted in that statistics, but if it does, it will be a very minor part of that trend data.
Okay, thank you, Ian. And we've been asked one, which I think possibly for Mark here. It's about design code. Are WBC proposing to produce a design code to ensure that Hall Farm doesn't become just another developer's pattern book development? If WBC is proposing a design code, will there be robust public consultation on the form and content of such a document, and how far in advance of the anticipated commencement of the developer's design process is it planned? Sorry, that's a bit of a mouthful, but I think it's about design code and how we'll produce one.
Yeah, the Wokingham is a member of the Town and Country Planning Association's Garden City group. So we have a long-standing relationship with one of the main drivers of the Garden City movement. We're very familiar with the work of Ebenezer Howard, or Ebenezer the Geezer, as he was known back in the day, because he was quite interested in the financial return of turning farmland into housing. which was one of his main drivers, I believe, in making the public more, or the working man more productive. That's not necessarily the driver nowadays. The driver is to create beautiful places, and that's one of the government's key sort of signature initiatives. We will be producing a supplementary planning document that picks up on all of the design and other key characteristics of a garden settlement as part of the suite of documents that follow on from the adoption of the local plan. We will probably start to commission that before the local plan is adopted, but at a point when we know that the preferred strategy includes a major strategic site, and we'll make sure that that site is included. Design codes will be considered, and we need to consider the merits of being highly prescriptive or being creative and enabling a quality development. And there is a discussion to have between the design code and design guidance. Being overly prescriptive isn't necessarily a good thing, but the answer is yes, we will be.
Thank you, Mark. We've reached 8:30, but there is just one question that popped in. I think it would be really good to answer, which is, has the land proposed for Loddon Valley Hall Farm already been sold to a developer? I think it's important that we clear that one up before we finish tonight.
There are two key landowners. One is the University of Reading, and they have not partnered with a development partner as yet. That would be known throughout the industry because it would be a massive procurement exercise for them. There is another element at the top that is already owned by, that is already in the hands of a developer, Bellway and Bewley. But that's known because they're the promoters of that element of the site.
Okay, well, thanks very much. That's all the time we've got for questions, but I'd just like to hand back to Councillor John Halsall to close the meeting. Thank you.
Just to thank you all for attending, and to emphasise that this is a consultation. We are really interested in your views. Please, if you do say something which is contrary to our views, we'd really like to hear what the proposal of the alternative is, and we'd also welcome support if there is support. But thank you very much for coming. The officers are going to be available for pretty much all the period of the consultation to help any new queries. So please reply, and thank you very much. Thank you for coming.